the 5 main press conferences are over, and all that's really left are some post conferences and what's actually shown and talked about on the show floor. So I would like to give kind of a wrap up of the 5 press conferences. First, I'm going to give kind of from just a number point, the kind of where the different companies set, and then I will kind of give my own opinion with some backing on that. First up, since they were first, and some ground rules here, I'm not counting montage, I'm not counting any game that they did not show gameplay footage of, and I will dock points from games that were shown previously in other conferences. I know that's kind of unfair, but they knew beforehand what was going to be shown at their competitors. So they could have at least they could have done things a little bit differently. So going over to that, starting with the Microsoft's conferences, they had 4 first-person shooters: the Halo, Splinter Cell, Blacklist, Resident Evil, which I guess is kind of an adventure game, but it is still a first-person, and then Call of Duty Black Ops 2. They had 2 sport games, Madden and FIFA. They had 2 adventure games, which were Tomb Raider, and I'm going to go ahead and throw South Park in there, just because that's probably what it's going to be. And then they had 1 fitness game, which was the Nike Fitness, and 1 dance game, which is Dance Central 3. I'm not including the Racketeer, since we weren't really shown if that was all in the game or if that was just a demo. It's kind of unfair to put that into the count. So basically, they have 11 games that they actually showed gameplay of at their conference. Now, EA had 4 first-person shooters. They had Deep Space 3, the Battlefield 3s and their expansions, the Medal of Honor Warfighter, and Crysis 3. They had 2 sport games, which were the Madden and FIFA. They had 1 real-time strategy, which was SimCity, and they had 1 racing, which was Need for Speed. I did not include SimCity Social, since I don't know if that's necessarily a browser game, or it really wasn't clear on exactly what that was. And I'm not including the Star Wars Old Republic, since that's kind of its own beast as well. So that was 8 games, 2 of which were previously shown, Madden and FIFA. Now, that's kind of, I know the sports stuff is EA's bread and butter, so that's kind of expected that they're going to show it in multiple places, though. They could have just done the Kinect stuff, at one and then more on the other, and they kind of did, but it's really not too much. So basically, they only had 6 games, of which they were shown that we hadn't seen before. Ubisoft had 3 first-person shooters: Far Cry 3, the Splinter Cell, and Shoot Mania, which I guess that's kind of loosely a first-person shooter. They had 2 adventure games: Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs. They had 1 platformer, which was Rayman Legends, and 1 dance game, Just Dance 4. Out of those 7, one of them was a surprise, which was Watch Dogs, but the Splinter Cell was actually shown at the Microsoft Xbox conference, so they only basically shown 6 games throughout the conference. Sony only had 3 adventure games, which were Assassin's Creed, God of War, and The Last One of Us. They had one first-person shooter, Far Cry 3, and one fighter, which was the PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. Now, I'm not including Beyond Two Souls, since we don't know what that is. They did not show any gameplay, even if what they showed was real-time rendered whatever. That's not how you're going to be controlling the characters in the game, so it's unfair to claim that actually showed gameplay footage, because it did not. And I'm not including the Wonder Book, since that's more of a peripheral and not really a game, although they did show some games on it, but that was more of a peripheral demo. So with that, there were only 5 games that Sony showed, and 2 of them, Assassin's Creed 3 and Far Cry 3, were actually shown and talked about at previous conferences. Now, you can argue that Assassin's Creed 3 actually had different material, as did somewhat Far Cry 3, but still, it wasn't anything new that we hadn't seen. For Nintendo, they had 4 adventure games, which were the Pikmin 3, Batman Arkham City, the Zombie U, and Legoland. They had 2 platformers, which was the Super Mario Wii U, and I believe Scribblenauts is kind of more or less a platformer. It could be technically a puzzle game, I think, but whatever. It had 1 dance game, which was the Just Dance 4, and they had 1 fitness game. And out of all that they showed, only 1 of them had gameplay footage from the previous shows, and that was the Just Dance 4. So with all of that, just from a flat out number crunching standpoint, Microsoft is first with 11 games. Nintendo would be second with 7 games. EA and Ubisoft tied with 6, and Sony came in last with 3. So just from a number crunching standpoint, love it or hate it, technically Microsoft did show more games. Now, I know it's kind of unfair because they were the first ones to actually present in the conference, but again, it's not like Ubisoft or whatever did not know that this stuff was going to be shown. And I do give some credit that some of the duplicates actually showed different information. But at the end of the day, it still was something that we heard before, and they could have simply put for Microsoft, they could have put Assassin's Creed in a montage form and give them something else, or whatever. There could have been some other options that they could have done and to mitigate all that. So that's where the standings are now. For me personally, kind of my thoughts on the overall thoughts of the different conferences. Microsoft's was kind of boring. They had a lot of pretty much, should I say, gimmicky items that they talked about with the system, like adding IE and various other functionalities of the system. And the games, while they did present a lot, didn't really do a whole lot in showing off. At least to me, they didn't really do a whole lot of showing off. So it was kind of a boring show. There were some stuff in there that caught my eye, like the Splinter Cell and the Tomb Raider demos that they showed really convinced me to actually want those titles, which is actually a pretty big plus. But just overall, it just wasn't it didn't seem like an energetic press conference. EA was almost a complete waste of time. Personally, the only thing that I was ever remotely interested in was SimCity, and even that, there was nothing really mentioned about it, just a bunch of trailers with actual gameplay in them. So that was a bit of a disappointment. Nothing really overly surprising. It's exactly what we kind of expected out of it, and not a whole lot was shown from what we expected. So EA just was quite boring. Ubisoft, now they showed up ready and willing to do what they needed to do. They actually they seemed ready for the conference. Not only did they actually have a very good press conference themselves, hosts not included, they actually were the major players in making the other conferences a success as well. So major props goes to them this year, which is really odd. I don't really remember another E3 in which Ubisoft was really this impressive. But they had a ton of games, a lot of which caught my eye. The Watch Dogs being the top of the list there, a complete surprise title. It's not a whole lot was shown or told, but what little was actually shown was very interesting. It seems to be a new approach, something that we don't see a whole lot of in other games, just the general overall concept, and the fact that you can have supposedly other players and such drop in and out of the game and have a non-solid objective potentially. It's just really intriguing and something very fresh and very new. To top it all off with somewhat of a gorgeous graphic outline, supposedly, from what we saw. It was very, very well put together. Sony was another one that they talked a lot about things that didn't quite jive with me. They're banking heavily on the success of the Vita this holiday season. If that flops, then really their whole shtick is kind of thrown out the window. The PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, they did say that it was going to be released this holiday season. I have my doubts on that, or at least I have my doubts that that's going to be released in full by then, simply because that is one of the titles that if they actually had more completed by E3, then they would have shown more at E3. They would have revealed more characters. They would have shown more levels and stuff like that, because that would be a pretty big hitter for them. The games is a pretty big hitter, potential huge success. The fact that they didn't and only really showed 4 in-game characters and announced 2 more tells me that they're quite a ways away from finishing. And I know from the amount of effort and work that goes into the Smash Brothers game that the music, the balancing, the actual body, the battle concepts, the items within the battles, the balancing of that, the stages, the number of stages, all of that is a lot of work, a lot more than just picking up characters and creating models and putting them into a game. So it's one of those games that if it does get released early, and I hate to say this because I want Smash Brothers to have competition. Competition is what generates innovation in games. So I want good competitions for Smash Brothers. But honestly, I feel from what was shown and based off of the timeline that the PlayStation All-Stars is going to probably turn into maybe a Smash Brothers clone, a step up from the Turtles or Cartoon Network clones, but it's not going to reach the level of where Smash Brothers is, and that's somewhat disappointing. So that's kind of just, I mean, that's kind of where I stand on that. Now, the other big title that seems to be floating all over the place is the Beyond Two Souls. Now, it's from the same makers of Heavy Rain, and I know that some of the biggest complaints in Heavy Rain that it was more of a story than a game. There really wasn't a whole lot going on and so forth. I have not played Heavy Rain, so I can't really give my own comments to it, but judging from what I'm calling a trailer from the show, just from the conference, no information from outside of the conference, that the Beyond Two Souls, we don't know anything about the game. We know that graphics are potentially really good. We have no gameplay footage of it. We don't know what type of game it really truly is. Is it a survival horror? Is it kind of a hybrid adventure, first-person shooter? What is it? Is it basically a movie with QuickTime events? We don't know. So I can't jump on any type of bandwagon for the game until more is shown. And it could be more could be shown outside of the press conference at E3. And I will be keeping my eyes and ears open for that. But really, there was no surprises for me when it comes to that particular game. Nintendo was a little bit of a disappointment. Again, as I mentioned in the conference review, they showed nothing to prove that the system is more capable than the PS3 and the 360. And that was one of the things that was a major, selling point that Nintendo was trying to convey to everyone, that this is next gen, but they showed no games to prove it. The closest thing that they showed was the Zombie U, and even then, that did not look next gen. The CGI rendered trailer and all that looked great, and it's definitely a huge step up from what the Wii is. It just at least from the gameplay footage that they showed, it did not look to be anything state of the art. So I'm kind of disappointed in that with Nintendo. I'm also kind of disappointed in the lack of information about how the gamepad interacts with the games. They made a whole big spiel about it last year about how it's the gamepad that they want to focus on and how it interacts with you and the player and everything else like that. And then they go out and basically they only show what we expected the pad to have, being a map screen or a replacement for the pause menu which would normally be in a game. There really wasn't anything to say, oh wow, this is awesome, or anything like that. So really quite disappointed in Nintendo in that regards. They did show a lot of games. The majority of them, though, were things that we've already seen, which again was a bit of a disappointment. So overall, the Nintendo stuff was just, I was hoping for a whole lot more. With that said, from an overall, all five included, it was really a disappointing E3 altogether. From what I saw from just the press conferences, mind you, there was no RPGs that were actually shown gameplay-wise. There was no JRPG shown. There was no real-time strategy game. The SimCity is the closest, and even then they didn't really go into any details outside of a gameplay trailer. And there were only 2 surprise titles, and out of the 2, only one of them, the Watchdog, actually had anything to show for it. So that's kind of disappointing overall. I know there wasn't any hardware updates or hardware releases or anything that to make it a really big surprise, but we're at the point where two systems are on their last legs, and one was brand new, and there was nothing big overly, there was nothing to really overly steal the show. It was just an overall disappointing thing. So, with all that said, here's my list for best and worst. First up, Ubisoft is the clear winner. If not for their conference alone, the fact that a lot of the big titles that looked interesting across the board, the Splinter Cell, the Assassin's Creed, if you're a Just Dance, if you're a dance fan, some of the big titles that that they brought to the table were what helped push all the other conferences. Not to mention that they're the only ones that really had a big time, huge game surprise. They just came ready, and I think they blew everyone else out of the water. Next up, I got for Nintendo, and Nintendo, it got me interested in a few games. Pikmin. I want to know more about the Tank. Legoland is a huge one, and the concepts of the Nintendo Land and the networking interface with the Wii U and how that works was quite interesting, and it really makes me want to learn more about the system and the games and all that stuff. It's just, if they had more of a presence, if the games had more of a presence, it would have beat Ubisoft. But since really there wasn't a whole lot discussed at the press conference, I'm gonna have to give that the number 2 spot. Now the third spot, and I know I need to hear me out a little bit here. I put Microsoft. I thought that the overall Microsoft's whole conference was quite unsurprising. However, for me personally, there were 2 titles, the Splinter Cell and the Tomb Raider, that really, really convinced me to pick up those 2 titles. I'm very eagerly awaiting them to be released. So there was a bit of drive for me. Now, the reason why it's kind of boring still is I probably won't be getting those games for this system. But it did present those games in a manner that made me really want them. And I know that the Splinter Cell was shown at Ubisoft's press conference as well and stuff like that, but there wasn't any gameplay at Ubisoft. The gameplay was shown at Microsoft, and that's what helped convince me that the game was incredibly interesting. So that's why I put Microsoft on the third on the list, though they didn't really have a very good showing in my opinion. Now, one that I really have to plead my case is Sony for number 4. If you sit back and look at what they presented, really, you got Assassin's Creed. I don't remember what they said about God of War, and the PlayStation All-Star were really the only ones that were coming out this year, this holiday season. I don't remember about the Wonder Book stuff either, but those were the only real ones that were there, and they didn't go over a whole lot about the games. God of War, again, if that is coming out, there's not a whole lot to go over except for the gameplay for that. Assassin's Creed 3, yeah, the ship stuff was great, but they didn't go through a whole lot of detail about the ship battles. They ended right when it was getting exciting. I don't know. It just felt like they didn't put a whole lot of emphasis on it, and I know why they probably didn't, is because it was already shown at Ubisoft's conference and stuff like that. But so outside of that, there was nothing really there. There was no. Yes, Beyond Two Souls was a surprise, but again, we don't know what that means. It was a surprise title. Just everything else didn't seem all that appealing. It did not convince me one bit to go out and get a Vita. If I didn't own a Move, or I don't own a Move, but it didn't convince me to have to go out and get a Move. If I didn't own the system, or really knew anything about the games, it really didn't do a very good job in convincing me to go out and get the system again if I didn't own one already. So that's why I thought the Sony's conference was really quite a downer, because it just didn't have anything to. If you weren't a fan of something already, then there was nothing there for you. It was just kind of a weak conference. And of course, the last was EA, which they presented nothing of interest to really. Even fans of the series, I can't imagine what they showed was all that exciting. The sports stuff, which is their main bread and butter, they didn't really do a whole lot with that outside of Madden and FIFA, and even then, they've only talked about things that should have been in the game years ago. Their shooters were uninteresting when compared to the others that were shown at the other conferences. BioWare didn't have anything of any worth. So I mean, it was just a boring show and a waste of time. But I can't knock it that hard. EA normally doesn't have that big of a showing anyways at E3. Sad to say, but we'll see where things lie. By the end of the expo. I will be continuing to show games and trailers and stuff like that throughout the week, and probably into next week, depending on how fast I can get things up. So I'll probably come back and give a overall listing of where I think everyone stood at the conference, and who knows, EA could be hiding their big surprise titles that they didn't show at the conference. Same with Sony. There could be a lot more surprises than they actually talked about. So, anyway, so there's kind of where I stand on it. Please, if you haven't, catch the other press conferences that I gave kind of a summary walkthrough of the games, and stay tuned for more videos. Thanks for watching. God bless.